It all began with a forgotten receipt. Not some poetic metaphor. A literal crumpled piece of paper stuffed carelessly into the pocket of my jeans. I wasn't snooping or anything like that. Hell, I didn't even notice it until I tossed the jeans into the laundry and it fluttered out onto the floor like some grim omen. It was from a fancy bistro downtown, the kind of place Jenna and I always talked about going but never actually did. The date? Last Thursday. The time? 8:30 p.m. The charge? 2 entrees, a bottle of wine that cost more than I spend on groceries in a week, and dessert. I stared at it for a long moment, my mind racing. I had been working late that night, stuck in the office until nearly midnight. Jenna had texted me around 7 p.m. to say she was exhausted and heading to bed early. So what the hell was this? I took a picture of the receipt, slipped it back into my pocket, and carried on like nothing had happened. But inside, I was a live wire, sparking with suspicion. That night, as Jenna curled up next to me in bed, her head resting on my chest, I couldn't stop replaying the details in my head. Her faintly sweet perfume lingered on the pillow, too faint, almost like she'd deliberately washed it off. Her breathing was steady, calm, as if she didn't have a care in the world. I wanted to ask her about it right then and there. I wanted to shake her awake and demand answers. But instead, I clenched my fists, stared at the ceiling, and waited for morning. The next day, I decided to follow her. I'm not proud of it, but I needed to know. Her schedule had become oddly predictable lately. Leaving for work at 8 a.m., home by 6 p.m., with the occasional work dinner thrown in. But there was something off about those dinners. She always came back looking too polished, too perfect. When she left that morning, I waited exactly 5 minutes before slipping out the door and getting into my car. I stayed far enough behind her, trying not to look obvious. She didn't head toward her office. Instead, she drove straight to a coffee shop I'd never seen her visit before. I parked across the street and watched as she got out of the car. She was dressed to kill. Heels, a fitted blazer, and a skirt that was just a touch too short for the office. My heart pounded as I watched her scan the street, then walk inside. I waited. Minutes passed, then 10, then 15. Just when I was about to convince myself I was being paranoid, I saw him. Tall, well-dressed, with that smarmy kind of confidence that makes your skin crawl. He strolled into the coffee shop like he owned the place, then walked straight to her. They hugged, like old friends, and I swear I saw her hand linger on his arm. This wasn't work. I sat frozen in the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. They stayed inside for nearly an hour before coming back out, laughing about something I couldn't hear. She touched his arm again as they walked to his car. A sleek, black BMW parked right next to mine. I ducked, my pulse hammering in my ears as they drove off together. I didn't follow them. Couldn't. My hands were shaking too much to turn the key in the ignition. What was I supposed to do now? Burst into her office, demand an explanation, throw the damn receipt in her face? No, not yet. If she was lying, I wanted the truth. All of it. But if I was wrong, if this was all in my head, the possibility of being wrong didn't feel real anymore. Not after that. And just like that, the wheels of something bigger had started turning. I wasn't wrong. The next day, I started paying closer attention, cataloging every inconsistency, every out-of-place smile or nervous laugh. Jenna had no idea, of course. She'd never needed to hide before. That morning, I casually asked her about her plans for the day. Meetings, and more meetings, she said, rolling her eyes dramatically. I'll probably be late again tonight. Don't wait up, okay? She kissed my cheek and breezed out the door like she hadn't just shattered every ounce of trust one had left in her. I waited for an hour before calling her office. Her assistant, an overly chipper woman named Lisa, answered the phone. Hey, Lisa, I said, keeping my tone light. Just checking if Jenna made it in yet. I might drop off lunch for her later. Oh, she's not here, Lisa chirped. She said she's working remotely today. Did she change her plans? My stomach twisted into knots. No, that's fine. Thanks for letting me know. Remote work? Sure, if by remote she meant hanging out with him. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. So, I called in sick to work and made a decision I never thought I'd make. I hired a private investigator. His name was Tom, and he was the kind of guy who looked like he'd been doing this since the Reagan administration. Gruff, no nonsense, and ridiculously expensive. But if anyone could get to the bottom of this, it was him. She's been meeting someone, I think, I explained in a rush, showing him the receipt and describing the man I'd seen. I just need to know for sure. Tom nodded, jotting down notes with a pen that looked older than me. Give me a week, he said. Maybe less. It only took 3 days. When Tom called me back, his voice was flat, businesslike. You're not gonna like this, he said. He sent over a file, pictures, timestamps, everything. There she was, my wife of 7 years, sitting across from that same guy at the bistro. In one photo, he was leaning in, whispering something in her ear. In another, her hand was resting on his thigh under the table. But the worst one, the one that made my blood boil, they were standing outside his car, her arms wrapped around his neck as they kissed. Not a quick peck, not a friendly hug. No, this was the kind of kiss that left no room for doubt. I stared at the pictures for what felt like hours, my emotions flipping between fury and heartbreak like a broken switch. This wasn't just a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was deliberate, calculated. By the time Jenna got home that night, I was ready. She walked in the door, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, her smile bright and easy. Hey, babe, she said, dropping her bag on the counter. How was your day? Long, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Yours? She hesitated just for a fraction of a second. Same. Meetings all day. I'm exhausted. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us, the photos already open. Her smile faltered as she glanced down at the screen. What's this? She asked, her voice a little too calm. You tell me. Her face drained of color as she swiped through the pictures. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, she laughed. Laughed, like this was some kind of joke. Mike, come on, she said, shaking her head. These are out of context. You don't understand. Out of context? I snapped, my voice rising. You're kissing another man in context. What the hell is going on, Jenna? She crossed her arms, her expression shifting from nervous to defensive. You've been spying on me? Seriously? That's low, even for you. Don't turn this around on me. I shot back. You lied to me, over and over. Who is he? Her eyes narrowed, her mask slipping for just a second. He's none of your business, she said coolly. And if you're going to act like this, maybe we do need to talk about where this marriage is going. That was the first crack in her facade, and it hit me like a freight train. Where this marriage is going? I repeated, my voice trembling. Are you serious right now? You're the one destroying it. Jenna didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her bag and walked out, slamming the door behind her. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about answers. This was war. When Jenna stormed out, I felt an odd mix of relief and fury. Relief because her absence gave me space to breathe, to think. Fury because her audacity to walk away, like I was the problem, lit a fire inside me that couldn't be contained. She hadn't even tried to explain, hadn't begged for forgiveness or shown an ounce of regret. Instead, she'd turned the tables, making me feel like the villain in my own damn story. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, staring at the pictures Tom had sent me, memorizing every detail. The way her hand lingered on his arm, the slight tilt of her head as she kissed him. It wasn't just infidelity, it was intimacy, the kind of closeness I thought was reserved for us. By morning, I had a plan. Jenna didn't come home that night. Her phone went straight to voicemail every time I called. But I wasn't stupid. I knew where she was. The next day, I called Tom again. I need you to find out everything you can about this guy. Who he is, where he works, where he lives. I want it all. Tom didn't ask questions, he just grunted in acknowledgement and hung up. While I waited for his report, I started gathering my own evidence. Bank statements, phone records, emails, anything that might paint a clearer picture. It was like peeling back layers of a rotten onion. I found a string of mysterious charges on her credit card. Luxury hotels, late-night Ubers, boutique stores I'd never heard of. None of it added up to her story of working late and client dinners. But the real kicker came when I logged into her email. Jenna had never been particularly tech-savvy, and she'd saved her passwords in the browser like some kind of amateur. It only took a few clicks to find what I was looking for. There they were. Emails to and from a man named Eric. At first, the messages were casual, work-related even, but as I scrolled further, they became personal. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. You make me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. I wish I didn't have to go home tonight. The blood drained from my face as I read the words, each one a dagger straight to the heart. There was no ambiguity here. No way to spin this as a misunderstanding. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was in love with him, or at least she thought she was. That night, I sent Jenna a text. We need to talk. Come home. Her reply came hours later. Not tonight. I'm staying with a friend. A friend, right? I wasn't going to let her keep running from this. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I sent her this message. Darling, I don't love you anymore, and I want a divorce. It was bait, plain and simple. A spark to ignite the explosion I knew was coming. And it worked. Within minutes, she was blowing up my phone. Text after text, call after call, all variations of the same theme. What the hell is this? Mike, pick up. You don't mean this, do you? I didn't respond. Instead, I waited. Finally, just after midnight, the front door slammed open, and Jenna stormed into the house like a hurricane. What the hell is wrong with you? She shouted, her eyes wild. You want a divorce? Just like that. I stayed seated on the couch, calm, collected. Isn't that what you want? I said evenly. I mean, you've already moved on, haven't you? Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. I stood, towering over her, and threw the pictures onto the coffee table. Stop lying, Jenna. It's all right here. You and Eric. The dinners, the hotels, the affection. I know everything. Her face twisted into something I didn't recognize. Part anger, part panic, part defiance. You've been spying on me? Are you serious? Don't you dare try to spin this around. I snapped. You're the one sneaking around, lying to my face. Don't act like the victim here. She crossed her arms, her voice dripping with venom. Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing someone. But can you blame me? Look at us, Mike. You've been distant, boring, predictable. You barely even look at me anymore. Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't flinch. So that justifies this? Lying, cheating, throwing everything we've built away. Maybe it does. She shot back, her voice trembling. Maybe I deserve more than this. More than you. For a moment, the room was silent, her words hanging in the air like smoke. Finally, I spoke. You know what, Jenna? You're right. You do deserve more. And so do I. Her expression faltered, confusion replacing the anger. This marriage is over, I said, my voice cold and final. But trust me, you won't walk away from this as easily as you think. She stared at me, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the upper hand. Jenna's mouth opened as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw fear in her eyes, fear of losing control, of losing me. But then her face hardened, and the bitchiness I'd grown far too familiar with took center stage. You're such a coward, Mike, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. You couldn't handle being married to someone like me. That's why we're here. You were never enough. The word stung, but I refused to let her see it. Instead, I let out a low laugh, shaking my head. You're incredible, you know that? Even when you're caught red-handed, you still think you can gaslight your way out of this. Gaslight? She scoffed. You're so dramatic. Do you even hear yourself? We've been broken for years, and you just sat there like a clueless idiot. Don't blame me for finally doing something about it. Oh, I'm not blaming you, I said, stepping closer. I'm just making sure you face the consequences for your actions. Her bravado faltered for a moment. What's that supposed to mean? I leaned in, close enough to see the crack in her armor. It means I've got everything I need. Photos, emails, bank records. And you know what else, Jenna? I spoke to a lawyer today. Her face paled. A lawyer? That's right, I said, relishing the panic flickering in her eyes. Turns out, infidelity doesn't sit too well with judges. So, when I file for divorce, I'll be coming for everything. The house, the savings, the car. Oh, and let's not forget, half of your precious new promotion salary. Jenna's mask of indifference shattered. You wouldn't dare, she hissed. Try me. I shot back, my voice ice cold. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing hard, her hands clenched into fists. Then, in a move so audacious it almost made me laugh, she grabbed the photos off the table and tried to rip them in half. Seriously, I said, snatching them back before she could do any damage. You think I don't have copies? Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked small, defeated, but it didn't last long. Jenna was never one to stay down for long. You're pathetic, she sneered. This whole pity party you're throwing for yourself. It's disgusting. No wonder I wanted out. Wanted out, I repeated, my voice rising. Then why didn't you just leave? Why the lies? The sneaking around? Why didn't you have the guts to tell me the truth? Because I didn't know how to, she shouted, her voice breaking. I didn't want to hurt you, okay? Is that what you want to hear? That I felt guilty? Guilty? I laughed bitterly. You didn't look too guilty in those pictures. Her face crumpled for a split second, but she recovered quickly, her voice sharpening like a blade. You don't get it, Mike. You never did. Eric makes me feel alive. He makes me feel wanted. And you're just there. Always there, but never really present. I stared at her, a strange calm washing over me. You know what, Jenna? I'm done trying to understand you. Done trying to fix this. You've made your choice, and now you get to live with it. I walked to the door and opened it wide, gesturing for her to leave. What are you doing? She demanded, her voice high-pitched and panicked. You said Eric makes you feel alive, right? I said, my tone mocking. Then go. Go to him. Pack your things and don't bother coming back. This is my house now. You can't just kick me out, she shrieked. Oh, I can, I said, smiling grimly. And I will. But don't worry, Jenna. I'll make sure the paperwork reflects exactly why this marriage ended. She hesitated, her eyes darting between me and the door, like she was calculating her next move. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. Get out, I said, my voice low and final, and for once she listened. She grabbed her bag, her keys, and whatever scraps of dignity she had left, then stormed out without another word. The door slammed behind her, and the silence that followed was deafening. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she'd been, my chest heaving. I'd won, but it didn't feel like a victory. Not yet. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for now, I had what I needed. The truth, and a clean break. And as I locked the door behind her, I knew one thing for certain. She might have started this war, but I was going to finish it. The silence of the house was suffocating after Jenna left. For 7 years, her presence had filled every corner. Her laughter, her perfume, even the way she used to hum off-key while cooking. Now it was just me, the empty walls, and a quiet I couldn't decide if I hated or craved. I didn't sit down. Couldn't. Instead, I paced the living room, replaying every second of that confrontation in my head. I should have said more, or maybe I should have said less. Hell, maybe I shouldn't have let her leave so easily. No, she was gone, and that was the point. My phone buzzed on the table, snapping me out of my spiral. I picked it up, half expecting another barrage of texts from Jenna. Instead, it was Tom, the PI. You're gonna want to see this, he said without preamble. What now? I asked, the exhaustion creeping into my voice. Eric, your wife's boyfriend or whatever you want to call him. He's not exactly who he seems. That got my attention. What do you mean? Check your email, Tom said. I'll send you the file. Let's just say, Jenna might have picked the wrong guy to throw her life away for. The call ended before I could ask anything else. Heart pounding, I opened my laptop and refreshed my inbox. Sure enough, there it was, an email from Tom with the subject line, Eric Hendricks, background. I clicked it, my curiosity outweighing my dread. What I found was almost laughable. Almost. Eric wasn't just some polished, well-dressed charmer. He was a walking red flag factory. 3 previous marriages, all ending in messy divorces. A handful of lawsuits from former business partners claiming fraud. And then there was the big one, a pending criminal investigation for embezzlement. I scrolled through the file, my anger bubbling into something dark and vindictive. Jenna had risked everything. Our marriage, our home, her reputation. For this guy, the irony was almost too much to handle. I didn't waste any time. I forwarded the file to my lawyer with a note. Add this to the case. Let's move forward. The reply came within minutes. This will help. A lot. Let's talk tomorrow to finalize the details. It was all falling into place now. The house was in my name, the accounts were split cleanly enough, and with Eric's track record, the courts would have no trouble siding with me. But it wasn't just about winning the divorce. No, I wanted Jenna to see exactly how badly she'd miscalculated. That night, I finally allowed myself to sleep, though it was restless. Dreams of her, of us, back when things were good, twisted into nightmares of betrayal. I woke up drenched in sweat, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I went to the gym. The weights felt heavier than I remembered, the treadmill unforgiving. But with every drop of sweat, I felt a little lighter, a little less burdened. It wasn't about punishing myself. It was about reclaiming something, control, strength, purpose. Afterward, I grabbed coffee at a local cafe, determined to take back pieces of my life one step at a time. But then, as I sat sipping my drink, I saw her, Jenna. She walked in, her sunglasses perched on her head, her phone in hand, and trailing behind her, like some smug shadow, was Eric. They didn't see me, tucked away in the corner. I watched as they ordered, laughing softly like they didn't have a care in the world. For a moment, I felt the old anger rise, hot and blinding. But then I noticed something. Jenna looked up. Her laughter was forced, her smile brittle. Eric wasn't even paying attention to her, scrolling through his phone while she fiddled nervously with her bracelet. And suddenly, it hit me. This wasn't love. It wasn't even lust anymore. This was her trying to convince herself she hadn't made the biggest mistake of her life. I could have walked up to them, could have thrown Tom's file in her face, humiliated them both in front of the entire cafe. But I didn't. Instead, I stood up, finished my coffee in one long gulp, and walked out the door without a backward glance. Because for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. She wasn't my problem anymore. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The peace I'd felt leaving that cafe didn't last long. Sure, watching Jenna and Eric play house had been satisfying in a morbid way, but I wasn't the type to let things end with quiet dignity. Not after everything she'd done. I wanted closure, yes, but I also wanted consequences. And for that, I needed a plan. It started with a phone call to my lawyer. Is there any way to expedite the divorce? I asked, pacing my living room. Normally, these things take time, she replied. But with the evidence we have, her infidelity, Eric's legal troubles, we might be able to push things through faster. Judges don't look kindly on adulterers, especially ones tied to criminal behavior. That was all I needed to hear. Good. Let's push. But the divorce was only part of the equation. Jenna had torn my life apart, and while I wasn't going to stoop to her level, I wasn't above a little strategic retribution. The first step was to confront Eric. Not in some macho, fist-flying way, he wasn't worth the energy, but with precision and intent. I waited a few days, watching Jenna's movements, tracking when she left and when she returned. She was predictable now, falling into a routine with Eric that was almost pathetic in its transparency. Finally, I found my opening. One evening, after she left for one of her dates, I followed her to his place. It wasn't hard to find. Tom had already given me the address. A sleek, modern apartment building downtown, all glass and chrome. The kind of place that screamed temporary success. I didn't need to wait long. Jenna went inside, and 10 minutes later, Eric stepped out onto the balcony. He looked smug even from a distance, sipping a glass of wine like he owned the world. I called up to him. Eric Hendricks? He squinted down at me, clearly confused. Yeah? Who's asking? I stepped closer so he could see me better. Mike Lawson, Jenna's husband. You've heard of me, I'm sure. His reaction was almost comical. He spilled a little of his wine, then tried to recover with an awkward laugh. "What do you want?" "Oh, just a little chat," I said casually, slipping my hands into my pockets. "You know, man to man." He hesitated, then waved me up. "Fine, come on." I took the elevator to his floor, my heart pounding as I stepped into his apartment. It was exactly what I'd expected. All style, no substance. Expensive furniture, abstract art, and zero personality. Eric leaned against the kitchen island, trying to look casual but failing miserably. "So, what's this about?" I pulled out my phone, opened the file Tom had sent me, and slid it across the counter toward him. "Recognize any of this?" He frowned, picking up the phone, his expression darkening as he scrolled through the documents. "Where the hell did you get this?" "I have my ways," I said, leaning back against the wall. "Now, here's the deal. You can keep playing house with Jenna if you want. I honestly couldn't care less at this point. But if you don't back off during this divorce, if you try to interfere or complicate things in any way, I'll make sure every one of these documents ends up in the hands of your investors, your partners, and the cops." His face turned a sickly shade of pale. "You can't do that." "Can't I?" I countered, my voice cold. "You're already under investigation, Eric. Do you really think they need more ammunition?" He stared at me, his jaw working as he tried to come up with some clever retort. But he had nothing. "I'm not here to fight you," I continued, straightening up. "I just want you to understand that Jenna isn't worth the collateral damage. So keep her for all I care. Just stay out of my way." With that, I turned and walked out, leaving him standing there with my phone still in his hand. As I stepped into the elevator, I allowed myself a small smile. Eric wasn't going to be a problem anymore. But Jenna? Jenna was a different story. She was going to learn that actions have consequences. And I was just getting started. Jenna returned home late that night, the same smug air of indifference plastered on her face. I had been waiting for her, sitting in the armchair by the fireplace, the papers spread out neatly on the coffee table like a dealer laying down a final hand. She barely glanced at me as she kicked off her heels, tossed her bag onto the floor, and started heading toward the stairs. "Don't bother unpacking," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to slice through her arrogance. She froze mid-step, turning to look at me. "What are you talking about?" I gestured to the table. "Come here. We're going to have a little chat." Her eyes flicked to the papers, suspicion flashing across her face. "I'm tired, Mike. Can we do this tomorrow?" "No," I said firmly. "Sit down." She hesitated, then sighed dramatically and dropped into the chair opposite me. "Fine. What now? Are we really doing another one of your little interrogations?" I ignored the jab, leaning forward to slide the papers toward her. "These are copies of the divorce papers. My lawyer drafted them this morning." Jenna blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Divorce papers? You're serious?" "Dead serious," I said, my tone cold. "You'll notice a few key details. The house? Mine. The savings account? Also mine. And your fancy little car? You can keep it, if you can afford the payments." She snatched the papers and began scanning them, her brows furrowing as she realized what was happening. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising. "You can't just take everything." "Oh, I can," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "Infidelity has a funny way of tipping the scales in my favor. And let's not forget your boyfriend's stellar reputation." Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "What did you do?" "I did my homework," I said with a smirk. "Eric's little extracurricular activities? Let's just say they're going to make this divorce a lot more interesting for you." "You're bluffing," she said, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. I leaned forward again, my smile fading. "Try me, Jenna. You've spent months lying to me, disrespecting me, and treating me like a fool. But this is where it ends. You don't get to walk away unscathed." She slammed the papers onto the table, standing so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. "You're unbelievable," she hissed. "You think you're some kind of hero here? Newsflash, Mike. You were never the man I needed. That's why I had to find someone else." I rose to my feet, my calm finally cracking. "Don't you dare pin this on me," I snapped. You had a choice, Jenna. You could have talked to me, told me how you felt, worked on this together. But instead, you chose to sneak around like a coward. That's on you, not me. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the weight of 7 years of marriage crashing down between us. Then, she laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. You know what? Fine. Take your stupid house, your money, your pride. But don't think for a second that you've won. You'll always be the guy who wasn't enough. Her words hit like a slap, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. You know where the exit is. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. The house felt even quieter than before, but this time, it didn't feel oppressive. Felt free. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle, then poured myself a drink. I didn't toast or celebrate. I wasn't there yet. But as I sipped the whiskey, I realized something. For the first time in a long time, I was in control. And that was a victory worth savoring. The days after Jenna left were a strange mix of chaos and calm. On one hand, the paperwork for the divorce was moving faster than I could have hoped. My lawyer, armed with everything I'd uncovered, assured me that Jenna didn't have much of a leg to stand on. On the other hand, the house felt like a museum of a life I no longer wanted, a monument to a relationship built on lies. I threw myself into cleaning, clearing out every trace of her. Her clothes went into boxes, her pictures came off the walls, her stupid throw pillows were tossed in a pile for donation. It was cathartic, almost therapeutic, to strip the place of her presence. But the most satisfying moment? That was when I found her secret stash of letters from Eric. Tucked away in a drawer in her office, the letters were nauseatingly cliché. I can't wait until we're finally free to be together. You make me feel alive in ways I never imagined. Mike doesn't deserve you. I read every word, a twisted kind of curiosity keeping me glued to the page. Then, with no ceremony, I tossed the whole lot into the fireplace and watched them burn. For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. The day of the first court hearing arrived faster than I expected. I dressed in my best suit, my lawyer by my side, and walked into that courtroom with my head held high. Jenna was already there, looking polished and poised in a way that made my stomach churn. But her confidence faltered the moment the judge started speaking. Mrs. Lawson, the evidence presented here is overwhelming. Your infidelity and the character of the individual involved paint a very clear picture. As such, I see no reason to contest the terms proposed by Mr. Lawson. Her face turned pale as the judge listed off the terms. The house, the savings, even a portion of her future earnings to cover legal fees. She glanced at me, her eyes wide, but I didn't flinch. When it was over, she stormed out without a word. I stepped outside, breathing in the cool air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. Not a small, bitter smile like before. A real, genuine smile. This wasn't just an end, it was a beginning. In the weeks that followed, I started rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work, picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned, and reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. Slowly but surely, the wounds Jenna had left behind began to heal. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Tom. Thought you'd want to know, he said. Eric's been arrested. Turns out, the embezzlement charges stuck. I laughed. A deep, cathartic laugh that I hadn't felt in months. What about Jenna? She's still with him, Tom said. For now. That was all I needed to hear. As I hung up, I realized something. Jenna had made her choice, and now she was stuck with it. Meanwhile, I had my freedom, my dignity, and a future that didn't include her lies. The scars were still there, of course. They always would be. But instead of holding me back, they reminded me of how far I'd come. And as I sat on the porch of my house, sipping a drink and watching the sunset, I knew one thing for sure. I'd survived the storm, and I wasn't looking back.